that sound I hear coming down from the icy fields of Svalbard in his shining armour? The king of the ice bears himself, Yorick Burnison. Whoever dares challenge this titan of the arena, best come prepared. Wait. Who's that? It's the WWF Panda. And he's got a gun. The World Wildlife Foundation. They've got the big panda. And I'd say probably 70% of people have some kind of thought that wrestlers are involved in conservation nowadays or something. They're the largest and most powerful conservation organisation on the planet. Starting off, I need to give incredible credit to the journalist Adam Cruz. He spent 2 years putting this investigation together, and what he's revealed is that the WWF is actively supporting the polar bear fur trade in Canada. As the logo of the WWF shows, certain animals are ambassadors, are charity ambassadors for fundraising. There's certain animals which are plastered all over the marketing to say, raise money to help this animal. So pandas is an obvious one, elephants, giraffes, foxes, and polar bears. And yet it now turns out that while the WWF is using your money, if you donate to the WWF, to protect polar bears, which is what they say they do, they are using some of that money to advocate for the continued hunting of polar bears. The activities here are not passive. This isn't them kind of taking a back seat when there's meetings about this going on. That would be bad and a form of cowardice in itself, but I'd say it's worse than that. Two examples that the investigation gives is at the 2010 CITES conference and the 2013 COP Climate Conference. But the WWF's main agenda at both of these conferences was to actively block any protections given to polar bears in Canada. Over and over again, the WWF is coming to these important gatherings of policymakers, and they are coming into the room as the most powerful, probably the most respected pro-environmental lobby, surrounded by governments which are so environmentally skeptical at the best of times. They are coming to these conferences and they are saying, no, do not grant polar bears in Canada these additional protections. So why? The WWF's two main arguments for keeping the practice alive is to support indigenous communities and indigenous livelihoods and to raise money for conservation. So let's examine those arguments, shall we?
And so it begins.
The indigenous livelihood aspect is the one which definitely has the most nuance to it. And I'm not gonna get all empire over here and be the Brit telling indigenous communities how to live their life and what is the correct way to live their life.
We will face danger from savages and from bears.
The investigation talked to local indigenous peoples. Robert Thompson, he was interviewed in this investigation. He's an Inupiat resident and polar bear guide from Kaktovik in Alaska. He said, "We didn't sell these animals for 10,000 years, and that's why they are still here. We didn't have a commercial need. There can be a good income from taking people to view the animals, and that is sustainable. I think if we just shot the bears to have more money, soon we wouldn't have any more bears." Indigenous peoples of the Arctic absolutely have a right and a need to hunt certain Arctic animals like polar bears, like narwhals, like beluga whales. But I find that the WWF here is creating a false narrative.
They're feeding us a bunch of lies, man.
That the commercial exploitation of polar bears is somehow some bastion of indigenous rights instead of a commercial enterprise that sells polar bear furs at up to $60,000 each and sells polar bear hunting licenses to tourists. And if we take the trophy hunting argument as a whole, it's often referred to in African game reserves, which by the way, the WWF, it does also advocate for keeping the hunting of giraffes, rhinos, hippos. Yeah, remember Mudeng? Oh, that was a good minute, wasn't it? Well, the WWF is about to Harambe Mudeng and sell his feet to make Chinese pencil holders. So the argument for allowing limited hunting in certain areas in Africa is down to the fact that these areas are reserves which protect the animals, they protect them from poachers, but this is a very expensive enterprise. So while they'll try to raise money in certain ways, there is an argument to be had that, okay, if you bring in a windfall of a very large amount of money for the sacrifice of a couple of individuals, that can support the population as a whole. And while I definitely have my own thoughts about that practice, it's something that has a clear motive and a clear benefit. But there aren't polar bear reserves. There isn't some overarching conservation area, some overarching protected area that you can say the money from the hunting of polar bears goes toward their conservation. It doesn't. It simply doesn't.
It'll be as if it never existed at all.
People, and especially indigenous communities which are struggling enough to make money, do need to make a living though. And as Robert Thompson pointed out, a good income can be made from viewing trips instead of hunting. And in fact, well, let's take a look into that. Let's break that down. Let's try and work out a comparison between what's more valuable, a hunted polar bear for $60,000 or the potential income from viewing polar bears alive. So this company, they do 14 trips per year, 22 people per trip. It's over $6,000 per person, about $6,100 per person. I tell you what, let's be fair. Let's assume they don't fully book the entire calendar. So let's say 75%. In that case, they will still make $111,475 per trip. Across the 14 trips per year, that's over $1.5 million. That's how much value can be gained from polar bears being alive in a single year. Extrapolate that across the lifetime of a polar bear. And really, what is the economic incentive to immediately end the life of a polar bear? The value of an alive bear vastly, vastly outweighs any amount of money you might gain from a single pelt. By the way, that $60,000 value that I mentioned for a pelt, that's the maximum amount. It ranges from actually about $5,000 to $60,000, depending on condition. And these companies, these tour companies, they can provide so much benefit to indigenous communities. They can be run by indigenous people. They can simply hire indigenous people. Either way, they can provide a constant, sustainable source of income to indigenous communities instead of these one-off, let's be honest, it's barely, I wouldn't call it really a jackpot or windfall because the value is not there in killing them.
Promise not to let the economic crisis spoil your weekend.
But why is this such a dangerous issue for polar bears? Are they just cute and cuddly and that's why we want to keep them alive? Because the stuffed polar bear I sleep with at night makes me think happy thoughts and keeps me safe from the monsters, and therefore we have to keep the real polar bears alive because they must keep the monsters away in real life, right? I mean, that's probably the main reason we're thinking, right? For some people, yes. They're just beautiful and majestic and they're in all the documentaries and it makes me feel warm inside to think about them. That's enough for some people and that's fine.
For her, but definitely not me.
But they are also one of the Arctic's keystone species. Let's break down exactly why a single polar bear death matters way more than any possible economic calculation. Polar bears are what ecologists call an umbrella species. As well as being waterproof, their presence indicates a healthy Arctic ecosystem, and their survival requires vast, vast tracts of land, which in turn protects and influences countless other animals in their territory. Removing a polar bear from an ecosystem is equivalent to knocking the bottom block out from a Jenga tower. Except on the way down, it also crushes and kills hundreds of other animals. A simple summary of how polar bears affect their ecosystems is in what they hunt. So typical prey of a polar bear, we're talking seals and beluga whales, maybe even possibly going for walruses and reindeer, maybe a narwhal as well. The presence of a polar bear not only affects the numbers of these creatures, but it vastly changes their behaviour. These animals have to completely change their behaviour to work around the fact that, of course, there is an apex predator.
I'm an apex predator.
That in turn affects every animal that those animals interact with. All the fish, all the plant life, all the birds, they all move around the environment at the behest of how the polar bear moves. Polar bears are almost unique amongst mammals in that they are both a land and a sea mammal.
You are the bridge between land and sea.
They act as a connector between the two environments. They transfer nutrients between the land and the sea in a way that is so hard for many other animals in some kind of natural way to do. They are bloody messy eaters, and the way that they eat attracts and supports the lives of a bunch of other scavengers. Imagine if the 27% of popcorn that you aimlessly threw at your face while watching Avatar 6, I guess we're in space now, supported a whole ecosystem. Cinema floors would get the best form of protection, and you would be a hero.
I've never had a hero before, but you are my hero.
And the reason why we should care about the hunting of a few hundred, it goes up to about 400 polar bears per year, well, there aren't many of them. Now, taking these numbers from the WWF themselves, the WWF say there's about 20 to 30,000 of them worldwide, most of those in Canada, where the hunting is taking place. And due to climate change alone, polar bear numbers are expected to drop by a third by 2050. Now, 2050, that does still sound like a long time away, right? But I'm afraid that it's as far away as the year 2000 is to today. It's not far at all. Each polar bear maintains a huge personal territory, with ranges stretching from 20,000 square miles to up to 135,000 square miles. That's the size of Germany for a single polar bear, which, I mean, that's the life, right? I mean, there's a reason I love polar bears so much. I mean, come on. There's a polar bear that has its own Germany-sized country.
He's the king of Germany.
Losing a polar bear unexpectedly, like, for example, via the rifle of an overweight tourist in a helicopter, has a massive, massive impact on that entire Germany-sized area. That polar bear is having an impact on all the many animals that live there. Suddenly, the Jenga block is gone, and its removal will have instant negative impacts across that environment. And if a female is shot, so a female, across a typical lifetime of a female polar bear, we're talking, let's say, 10 to 12 cubs. Obviously, it varies. Let's say 10 to 12 cubs across a lifetime. You shoot a female polar bear, let's assume it's halfway through its lifetime. So let's say there's 5 to 6 more potential bears that suddenly are gone. So then we're also denying the environmental benefits and the cascading impacts of future generations of polar bears. This is all simply to say the benefit of an alive polar bear massively outweighs any possible benefit you can think of for shooting one. Yes, indigenous peoples, indigenous communities, they should be allowed to take what they need, but the commercialization of the trade, killing of polar bears, animals which without hunting are rapidly declining, which will in turn cause the decline of the entire ecosystem. I mean, it's wrong in every sense of the word. It's idiotic. It's morally wrong, it's economically wrong. The chance to save the polar bear species is here today. This isn't something we can think about in 10 years' time. This is something that we need to get right today. When I was a kid and I first read that story with Yorick Bernison, I was amazed. I was enthralled. It was magic to me. And when I found out that's real, it's a real place, that is what drove me to be where I am today. That is what sent me to the Arctic. And that is why I'm here trying to do what I can to protect and raise awareness about the Arctic today. But what's going to happen in future generations? They're going to read stories and it's just going to be myth. Just going to be a story. And it's not going to create the people that are trying to save the world. It's not going to make a magical real world. People just going to have to escape into stories because the real fucking world is nothing worth saving. 60 grand for a polar bear's life. It's not worth it. And the WWF, it knows all of this. They have some of the world's top scientists, ecologists, conservationists or working for them. Yet they're supporting this trade, which adds unnecessary pressure to an already endangered, threatened species. I bet the brilliant, hard-working, caring people that work at the WWF, I bet in their hearts they disagree with this. I genuinely, I cannot believe that the people working for the Arctic arm of the WWF actually support this. There must be some messaging from the top, and this is an extremely wealthy, powerful corporation. At the top, I don't know how much they care. The WWF have responded to this investigation, which basically, it's a nothing response. It's basically just no. Anyway, thanks again to the brilliant work done by Adam Cruz. If you enjoyed the video, if you agree with what I'm putting out there, I implore you to make your voice heard. The WWF and charities like these, they live and die by public opinion. This is a way you can actually make a bit of a difference, okay? So make your voice heard, get the message out there that not completely disband the WWF, but just simply they can make amends. The WWF can rectify this. Look for the protection of polar bears. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for spending some of your time with me today. As always, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe and things like that. Stay safe, stay warm. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.